I was working on a clear for OS S3, and I will be posting that sometime in the future, probably a week or so after the event ends. But after spending so much time buried under those mushrooms, I started thinking about my perception of them over the course of this event, as well as some other recent event mechanics. After being introduced to the avalanche mechanic, my immediate strategy was to park defenders on the borders of the avalanche zones. I let enemies pile up inside the area, and eventually enough enemies would step into the area and an avalanche would wipe all of them out. It's a pretty basic strategy, one that the game even hints at in the tutorial. And then these fun guys show up. My initial reaction to them was, "You little pricks." In their first appearance, they clearly have one goal, and that is to protect the massive swarm of enemies from the avalanches. But as the stages progress, something interesting happens. This stage, OS EX7, opens with what at first glance feels like a waking nightmare. An avalanche zone covers the left half of the stage, while the mushrooms in the middle feel like they're encroaching on the limited real estate on the right. As far as useful tiles go, it looks like there's only one melee tile and 4 range tiles where you can safely put operators. If you don't spot the trick on the normal version of the stage, the challenge mode thrusts the issue front and center by putting a new avalanche zone over the right side of the map. The purpose of this stage is to show the player that the mushrooms, while annoying, are also cool dudes that don't discriminate and will happily protect you from the avalanches, in the same way they do with the enemy. This eventually culminates in OS S3, where using the mushrooms in this way is pretty much non-negotiable. This sort of design, where an enemy can actively help the player, if they're willing to play along with the mechanics, is a fun and interesting way to add some depth to enemy abilities. This isn't something entirely new. For example, the flamethrower guys from Chapter 9 that explode on death, taking out fellow flamethrowers, or the bone guys that spawn range tiles in Path of Life. However, it's starting to feel like these kinds of enemies are becoming more frequent. Just a quick point of clarification here. There are many cases where a mechanic could, in the right circumstances, end up being helpful. Maybe because of a specific interaction with an operator's mechanics or something, like DOT versus someone with defensive recovery. I'm not talking about things like that. I'm talking about cases where Hypogryph specifically adds something to the design of an enemy that explicitly helps the player. As far as recent events go, the first that came to mind were the heroes and villains in Act or Die. Which, look, I know that probably doesn't feel very recent. There's been so many special events like Contingency Contract, Icebreaker Games, Dual Channel. There actually haven't been that many events that introduced new enemies in the last half year. But yeah, in Act or Die, the hero and villain enemies follow a similar trajectory. My first reaction to them was similar. You little pricks. Up until they are introduced, the mechanic was fairly simple. Point the camera towards the enemies to weaken them. And then these guys show up. They see they're on camera, and they start getting increased range or doing double damage. But the game very quickly shows you how you can start pitting the heroes and villains against each other. They even put in a medal, just in case you missed the mechanic. And the arc culminates with ADEX7, which I think is the most memorable stage of the event. In it, the stage becomes significantly easier if you are able to keep the camera pointed on the heroes and villains. It's set up in a way that's so explicit, it almost feels a little ham-fisted in its execution. I don't know, maybe Hypogryph were really worried about people just blasting through everything with meta operators, and really wanted to make sure people got the experience of using an event mechanic for once. More recently, we have the Chapter 16 release, and everyone's favorite boss, the Snow Bear. Just like before, the Snow Bear is introduced as a problem. The 3 enemies he spawns with are essentially non-issues, and your first fight against him is more or less a one-on-one. But once you get to the H stages, well, he's still a problem, but he's also a solution, and if you're willing to put a bit of effort luring him around and staying out of his way, he can help with taking out a lot of troublesome enemies, even the final boss in H16-4. Overall, I think these kinds of enemies make understanding the mechanics feel more rewarding, and also allow for more interesting decision-making opportunities. For example, deciding which mushrooms you want to destroy early and which you want to keep alive for their protection, or choosing where to put your operators to maximize the friendly fire damage between enemies. And I hope that Hypergriff continues to make more enemies like this, because they're actually pretty fun. Alright, that's all I wanted to say here. Thanks for watching.
A few years ago, I heard some rumors about the Kazdel Civil War. Seems time has not rusted your talents in this area.